Hello, my name is Jacqueline Ganem DeFalco, and I'd like to welcome you to 2021 Cape Ann ARTWaves, a member program of 1623 Studios that delves into the life of our working artists here on Cape Ann. Today is a very special day because we are about to introduce a new design and a new format for our show, and each of our artists will actually be now featured for 2 weeks. I co-host this show with Christine Fisher, so I'd like to thank her for her efforts to take this forward into 2021. Today, we are also introducing our new sponsors, and without these new sponsors, this entire show of 2021 would not be possible. So special thanks today to Prince Insurance Agency, Christine Fisher, artist, the McDermott McCarthy team at Gibson Sotheby's International Realty, and the Common Crow. We'd also like to acknowledge our partners, C-Arts and 1623 Studios, who will be promoting the show on our behalf. And finally, we are excited to introduce a local musician who is providing the musical support for the production of the show, Steve Lacey, the guitarist. Thank you again for joining us. Today's featured artist is Marty Morgan. Welcome, Marty.
Thanks.
Happy
to be here.
Before we get started, from Marty's point of view, I'd like to actually provide my own point of view on Marty as not just an artist, but a phenomenal member of Cape Ann's community at large. So Marty has been an artist here since 1972. And among her many, many accomplishments and participations, she's a founding member of the Cape Ann Artisans. She's also been a huge contributor and leader in the ceramic arts community here and the greater arts community, and as well the entire business community. Among Marty's achievements, she is an instigator and a constant contributor to the Empty Bowl fundraiser for the Open Door. She was responsible with a lot of planning for launching a 30th year celebration for the Cape Ann Artisans at the Cape Ann Museum. She's been involved with the Cape Ann Chamber of Commerce, and in fact, I met Marty as a businesswoman at one of the chamber events where she was one of the keynote speakers. So Marty's impact has been far and wide in not just her own specialty in ceramic arts, but really helping so many people in Cape Ann in the arts community. And so I'm just honored today to hear Marty's story firsthand and share it with this audience. So Marty, I'd love to learn more about your creative journey, your path to be one of our most beloved ceramic artists and a leader of the arts community here in Cape Ann. So start from wherever you'd like to tell us your story.
Thanks, Jackie. And first of all, I'd really like to thank you and Christine for all the work you put into making these programs possible. I know what it takes to do something like that. So thanks for inviting me. I've told this story about how I started doing pottery over and over with variations. When people asked me when I was in college what I was going to do afterwards, I always said, oh, I'm going to be a French teacher. So that made sense. I was supporting myself to go to school, and I ran a bookstore in Brookline, the Booksmith, which had an original print gallery in it. And I had a friend running that when I was managing the store. She was a talented sculptor and painter. And one day I was hanging out in her studio in Brookline, and she gave me some clay to play with and taught me how to make a coil pot. I was fascinated to be able to make something so simple, and it felt good and it was fun. Well, it didn't take long before I abandoned the whole French teacher routine, and I started taking classes evenings at the museum school. I was really terrible. So when people come to my studio and say, oh, you have this natural gift, I always laugh, because when I started out, I could not center a pot. And one night the teacher was across the room and she kind of giggled, and I knew it was because she saw how little clay I had left. I packed up and left. And my good friend Alice Lurio, who got me started in this, said, just go back and tell her you really want to learn and ask for some help. So I did. I said, okay, one more time, that's it. And I asked her for help. And she said, well, what if we start with 2 pounds of clay? So then I could wear a whole pound of clay away and still have something to work with. So when people ask me about natural talent, I always say it has nothing to do with it. I'm just a very stubborn person.
And so from there, tell us more about how you just did this. I mean, did you work for anyone else along the way? Did you just all of a sudden start to sell pots? Give us a little bit of beginning, because as long as I've known you, you've had a studio down the street.
Well, I had a lot of very nice opportunities along the way. I moved to California in '68, and my first husband very generously said, why don't you take 5 years and see if you can do pottery and make it support itself, and if you still like it. And that was very generous of him. I found a cooperative in Monterey, and one of the women there had just taken up tennis, and that's all she wanted to do. And she had been the one mostly firing their gas kilns. So she taught me how to do that. And I became the one doing most of the firing. And that co-op also gave me my first chance to sell my work. So I did some craft shows with them. And I was there for 2 years, then moved to San Francisco. I couldn't find another co-op like that. And building a kiln in my backyard, and started doing wholesale work and craft shows. I was a member of the San Francisco Potters Association. And that's really where I got started. But then my ex-husband moved back to Massachusetts, and I with him, and again, could not find any equivalent co-op. So I rented a place in Manchester, Mass, and started my own, rebuilt the kiln from San Francisco. And of course, once I started that, lots of people came out of the woodwork who wanted to be part of it. So I did have different people come and go, making pots with me. And for a while, I had a large retail store on the first floor with my studio in the back, a teaching studio downstairs. And in the retail store, I had a local weaver and a furniture maker. And later, Mari, the jeweler, worked there. She didn't work there, sold her work there for a while. So Manchester was a lot of fun. I kind of had a salon every Wednesday night. People would come and play music and hang out. And I met great customers who became friends, and some customers who are still buying my work after, 50 years. So that was another good opportunity. And I did craft fairs as part of that, and some wholesaling, and really ran around doing everything I could to support myself. I was part of the Christmas store in Cambridge for a number of years, and that existed just at Christmas time, and I could sell everything I could bring in there. So that was terrific. Then in '79, the owner of the building decided to sell it, and the new owner said the rent was going to go up and up and up. And I said, well, I can't do that. So at that point, we looked around, and I found my present location in Gloucester, which is just a treasure. I don't have the same commercial space on the street the way I did in Manchester, but I was able to take over what had been a garage and make a studio and have a little retail shop. And we're right on the Mill River, so it's idyllic.
Right. And then, of course, all those years on the studio tour, people really got used to you being right there. You know, you were either the beginning or the end, right? Right. In that spot. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And one of the things I was able to do here was to build my dream kiln, which is a large 65 cubic feet, large gas kiln. runs on a little track, so I can load it inside my studio. And now I have a boat trailer winch on it, so I can crank it all by myself, although I usually get my son to do it.
Yeah.
Side into the body of the kiln. And then all the heat and fumes are out there, but I'm warm and comfortable while I'm loading it.
I'd like to talk first about your style. I have one of my own Marty Morgan vases here, and I have all, different pieces from you from over the years, and I love to give them as wedding gifts. And, it's sort of, and then of course, everyone has to have a Marty Morgan mug. We know that.
Wonderful.
But one of the things that's really stricken me as a observer, and even watching like the Ceramic Arts Festival and meeting so many potters over the years and knowing that you teach and other people have taught over the years, there's so many people. It's like jewelry in that sense too. There's so many people in this space of pottery. So how did you distinguish yourself over the years in terms of your style, your brand? I'm really interested in that before we even get into process or anything else, because this is to me one of the big mysteries about pottery.
Well, I always liked really simple designs and lightweight things. When I was learning, our teacher had us throw 10 or 12 pieces and then cut them in half to see how thick they were. So from the very beginning, I wanted to make things that were light and felt good when you use them. I know a lot of people come into a pottery studio and think handmade pottery is going to be heavy, and they'll pick something of mine up and go, oh, it's so light. So a lot of the work I've done over all these 50 years, you can see the evolution. I have a bowl here from 1969. Simple, it's a stoneware bowl. You can see the dark clay. The whole thing has a matte glaze on it. And then I poured this iron glaze, kind of drip down edges. It's a little heavy. I still use it for making cookies. But over the years, that same shape has evolved. So this is actually a porcelain bowl, but it's sort of along the same lines. But you can see this line is much prettier, and there's a smaller base. So you feel it lifted up. Rim flares out a little more. So the whole thing is just evolved. It's not hugely different, but I can see the difference. I worked for years with mostly stoneware and 3 or 4 different glazes. These 2 mugs are a good example of those. On this one, I glazed the inside and dipped the top part with this white glaze. I dipped the lower part in a dark blue, and where it overlaps, you get that third color. And then using that same dark blue, I used a little syringe with glaze in it, and I put some white glaze and then a sort of gold glaze on it. And they do completely different things when you layer them differently. So I did those for years and years and years. And then at some point I started working with porcelain because I love the feeling of it. I have to get used to it because it's kind of like throwing cream cheese. There's no, with the stoneware, you can pull it up and smush it around and it doesn't collapse. Porcelain, you kind of have one shot to make what you want. You can't keep playing with it. But I have some porcelain mugs, and these were all glazed with the same glaze.
How many different glazes, Marty?
And they're each really different.
Okay, but okay, the definition of a glaze, I'd like to hear it from your perspective. I think I know what it is, but I want to be sure that you define glaze for me.
Well, the glaze is made up of things that will hold on to the clay and will melt
Okay.
and things that will create different colors. So there are feldspars and clays and oxides, and you start basically with a recipe and play with it until you get the surface and the color you want. So
Okay.
I made up a lot of my own, and I've used countless glazes that are just out there in the world. There are books and books full of them.
Yeah.
Most potters are fairly generous about sharing them.
Yes. I noticed that most potters are just fairly generous anyway.
And most of them are good cooks. They like to cook.
No, I like that. I like that a lot.
They like to use their work.
So let's move on, because you were jumping into this. And so I want to be able to talk a little bit about the tools and process. And I know you have this amazing kiln you started to talk about. And I know that that is a kiln that you also share with other people, and help other folks fire their work. So talk to about how your tools and equipment have evolved over the years to get you sort of to where you are today. And then if you have any like favorites, and then I'd like you from there to go on to talk about the difference between doing, the pots and these kind of functional pieces to the wall pieces that I see behind you, because I'm sure that involves a slightly different process. So if you can kind of start with, just a quick summary of kind of your evolution first, and then along the way, what you've said, hey, I'm going to stick with this no matter what, in terms of your favorite tools or processes or ways that you get into your work. And then I just want to see how that changes when you move from a pot or, a piece of functional pottery to start to the wall pieces.
Well, most of my work for all the time that I've been making pots has been done on the wheel. Okay. And so you can take a wheeled piece and then alter it if you want to, and I do some of that. But most of my dinnerware, lamps, all those things are done on the wheel. And then several years back, I had a good friend, Pat Pandolfi, who lived in Rockport, and she had worked in clay as well. And she said, what could we do together? And she had done a lot of quilting. So we said, how about if we make a stoneware quilt? She actually took a lot of little stamped tiles that I had and made a computer program with a design template for how we would repeat different ones. And we made this enormous stoneware quilt. So at the time, she had a slab roller, and we would roll out slabs there and then bring them to my studio to work on. So at some point, I decided I had to have a slab roller. It's like a giant pasta machine. So you put a big lump of clay on it, and then you crank it through these two rollers, and you get a nice big slab. So when Pat moved to California a few years back, I started making wall pieces just on my own, and those became more inspired by the quarries, so that I would roll out a big slab of clay and heavily texture it. And that's a lot of fun. So I found all different kinds of tools. I mean, things you wouldn't think of, like the little edge of a cardboard box that has all those little cells. So press it into the clay, you get that kind of pattern, and it can look like grass or all different kinds of things. So potters are known for picking everything up and saying, ooh, can I make a stamp out of this? One of my favorite stamps is from the bottom of a sneaker I had. Really, it just had a beautiful design. So I stuck on a piece of clay, and then I made a little stamp out of it.
Yeah. Hey, there was a photograph you sent me of a pot in front of a vase in front of a river that looks like
little mushrooms on it.
Oh, mushrooms. Okay, great. So how did you make those, for example?
I made the pot and textured it. And then I put it next to my kiln. So it was in what's called the leather hard stage. It's not dry and it's not sopping wet.
Mm-hmm.
I sat at the kiln, I mean, not at the kiln, at the wheel with a big lump of clay. And I threw off the top of that lump of clay those little pieces that flare out, and pinched them off that top piece of clay and stuck them onto the pot, layering them like that.
Okay. It's a wonderful effect. I mean, it's just fantastic. And, they look so real to me, you know.
Mm,
I feel like I want to just pick them off like, oh, how did this get
right.
stuck here?
Yes.
That's great.
Well,
That's
it's fun. Most of those pieces that I call quarry vessels,
yeah.
Or the quarry wall pieces, have both glazes on them and just stains. So the areas that look very matte, a lot of kind of orangey or darker colors, are just things like iron oxide or rutile or yellow iron oxide.
It's so interesting though that, you really have to become part chemist, it sounds, to become a potter over time and know how things react
It
together.
helps.
Yeah. Did
It
you like
helps. I
chemistry?
mean, if you want to, and there are certainly places where you can do this,
Yeah.
you can just go buy all the mixed up glazes and use them. You don't have to do the whole thing yourself. I mean, part of my studio has 50-pound bags of feldspar and Cornwall stone and Edgar's plastic kaolin clay.
That's
like
great.
that, which I use to mix up glazes.
Right.
But you can just order pre-mixed things if you want to.
And now let's talk about the evolution of, the essentials, because we know you have to have a wheel. And it sounds like in terms of forming things and creating patterns, everything else is up for grabs that is in your house, right?
Yes.
But as far as kilns, that's another science. So maybe you could just speak to, how you got to where you are today, and just that's a huge investment, it's a huge learning curve, and it's a huge responsibility to have a kiln like that. So maybe just speak to that for a minute, because I don't know how many other people would have a kiln on the tracks like that, even on Cape Ann.
I don't think anybody else has a car kiln here. Iris Mink has one up in Merrimack.
Okay.
Hers is completely indoors. I had started off learning to fire in gas kilns at the museum school and then in California. So I wanted that effect. This dark blue glaze, if it was fired with the same glaze in an electric kiln, would be a sort of olive drab color. And clay, instead of being dark brown, would be buff. But what you get with the gas kiln is what's called reduction firing. And it affects both the color of the glaze and the color of the clay itself. So you get completely different effects. And I liked what you got from gas. So I was determined to keep on doing that. So my first kiln in California was a gas kiln. And then this one, which I had a fellow named John Baymore from New Hampshire design for me, and he and I built it, has held up very well. I mean, I built it in October of 1979, and I've made a few changes, but not many to it. And I'm really happy with it. The other thing that's really different is in the porcelain, you can get a lovely celadon effect. And if you have a red glaze, I forgot to bring one in, but if you have a red glaze in the gas kiln, it's a copper glaze and it comes out red. If you fire in an electric kiln, it would be just copper green. So all these things make a difference. And I was fortunate to have a lot of support doing it. My ex-husband helped me build my first kiln, and Mark Lindsay, I was with for 45 years, helped with the second one, and always did the revisions. And each time before I fired, he would clean out the burners for me and make sure they were all working. So.
Well, I think a demonstration on that kiln in itself would be just completely amazing, to see it from how it's used, how it's put together, how it's used from beginning to end. So we'll show some pictures of your kiln, and hopefully people will be curious enough to come down and visit you and find out more. So I'm going to switch to a slightly different tack here, Marty, because you and I could speak for days with all your incredible background and knowledge. And one of the things that's always struck me about you from the moment that I met you is that I really feel like you're a lifelong learner. And also you've really cultivated your business, in very unique ways over the years. You've been very attentive to your own sort of marketing platforms, and building a wonderful following and a wonderful audience. I know you've been to conferences. So given all of those things, I'd love to find out more from your perspective, what really worked for you, and sort of what things have really helped you over the years, because this is important definitely for that next generation, and even your peers and colleagues out there who are just trying to figure out how to really make a living doing this.
Yes, it's certainly a challenge. And I sold pots every way you can imagine. When I came back from California and started the place in Manchester, I was teaching, I was doing wholesale work, I was doing craft fairs. And one day a woman came in who lived in Lexington with a friend, and the friend said, "Oh, you really should have a show for Marty at your house. You know all about pottery, and you could introduce her to a whole lot of new people." And I was thinking, how would this work? But I said, sure, let's try it. So I went out there one day, and she had invited people to come, and I set up my pots all through her dining room and kitchen, living room. And people came and bought just about every single thing I had brought out there. In fact, I had a friend with me who came back to my studio and brought more things out. So I ended up doing that twice a year at her home for years. And that was a really good way to reach people, because most of them didn't come unless they were interested to begin with. And they brought other people, and then they also came up to my studio. So I loved doing that. And I think that's something anybody could do. You don't have to have a storefront. You do have to be able to talk about it, and you have to enjoy that. And I know for some people in the arts, working with the public is not something they want to do. So I think I'm fortunate in that sense that I've had a retail background before I started doing pots. So I was used to that, and I enjoyed it. Meeting people and talking about whether it was books or prints or pots. And then things like the Christmas store cooperative was a real opportunity. Sandy Shaw, who lives up here in Essex, was in that as well. So I've known her all those years. So you get a group of people to come together and have a space and do all the publicity and everything that it takes to run it without one person having have all the expense of it.
Right. And I would just say, though, the publicity, is something you've always really focused on in anything you've done, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah. So I think you've been a big advocate for that, and you practice what you preach, right?
Right. Well, and usually if you have a nice little story, someone's happy to publish it.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's super. I mean, I guess if there are any other pearls you want to share specifically on that side, I think people will always benefit from that in terms of, because shows, of course, are few and far between at the moment.
Having a good record of what you've done, having good images. I can't stress that enough. And I mean good images,
Yes.
which takes some work. Either have it professionally done or figure out how to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And just get out there and don't be shy about promoting yourself.
Right. Well, that's right there. Let's end that piece on that note, because that's super important. I'm going to just ask this last question because we're going to run out of time. And I think at this stage of your life, you're really, you've been obviously influenced by people over the years, but I think at this stage, you are the influencer who probably have influenced people for years and will continue to. I know you've certainly done that for me and people that I know in my circle. And so I think what I'd love to get from you, Marty, is what you want to share in terms of your most important lessons and thoughts and inspiration around art and pottery. What would you like others to know and live by in terms of what you've learned from your artistic journey?
Well, there's so much. I was fortunate to have my first teacher be someone who had studied in Japan and brought those traditions back and taught even the most beginning students how to approach clay in that Japanese way. I think that was a great start for me. And part of that is doing things over and over and over. I love having Nina Goodek in my life right now. I fire things for her. And I'm 79. I just turned 79. And every now and then I think, is this enough? Have I had enough pottery making? But being able to work with someone like Nina, who's so excited and enthusiastic about doing it, keeps me inspired. So that's a great help. But otherwise, I would say just look around at everything. One of the things I have is a huge collection of pots by people from every conference that I went to and every workshop that I went to. Some of them were very expensive, some of them were not, but I treasure them because I use them in my daily life. So having those around makes me think, oh, do I want to try a different way of doing a handle like that? Do I want to play with ash glazes? So I think going to workshops, seeing how other people work, because most potters, when they do a workshop, are sharing not just their technique, but their whole lifestyle, how they make it work. Some of them have families, some of them don't. They just clay is it. That's what they do. They might have a dog to take for a walk. But they're all very generous about sharing what they do and how they do it. So I would say, go to workshops. You can do one for a weekend or a day, a lot of them online now, and get together with other potters and talk about what you do. And most of all, just have fun.
Marty, what a great way to wrap up today, to have fun, because everybody that I know that works in your medium seems to be having a lot of fun. So I'm gonna put you in charge of that. Anyway. So
Yes, I have I really should finish with my little mantra bowl.
Oh, what a great idea. Yes.
Be hopeful, be grateful, be joyful, be present. And if you do all those things, you will have fun.
Oh, just a beautiful note. And we all need that going into this next year. So thank you, Marty Morgan. Marty, this has been such a fantastic way of getting to know you, but I really think that there's a lot more people out there that need to come and stop at your studio and stop at your website. So why don't you just tell us how you're currently greeting customers?
Well, you can find my work on my website, www.martymorganpots.com, or right now during the pandemic, you can come by appointment wearing a mask to see my studio. And we hope by the end of the summer, it will just be open again. We might still be wearing masks, but we might be able to have regular hours again. And I'm right at 428 Washington Street in Gloucester, right on the Mill River. So you can come and see my pots and sit by the river and have your lunch.
Right. And there's big flag when you're open, right? I always
Yes.
see that
Well,
flag.
the sign says open studio. So
Yeah.
you can come anytime. Doesn't have to have the flag out.
All right. That's great, Marty. Thank you. And we will
Okay.
also show all of your information at the end of this video. And so with that, I'd like to end our interview today and thank our audience for joining us. Thank our sponsors who are going to be shown here on the screen, and encourage our audience to look for us on 1623studios.org and also on Facebook and on YouTube. And please share Marty Morgan's story. Thank you again from Cape Ann ARTWaves.